Thanks. Hey, everybody. I think you like the movie. It's pretty great. My name is Gregory Elwood. I'm with the Playlist, and this man needs no introduction is Mr. Willem Dafoe. So first off, Willem, is the easiest question and most obvious of all. How did this project come your way, and what made you want to sort of jump on board?
I've known Julian, the director, for many years, and he was talking about, he wasn't sure he wanted to do this project. It was something he was exploring. He mentioned it to me. I was working on a script with Jean-Claude Carrière. He's told me to start looking at some materials, reading some books, taking some notes, and then one day he called me over and we took some pictures. He put a lousy fake red beard on me, and his girlfriend took some pictures, and then a couple of days later he said, let's do this, and I got to teach you how to paint.
And we spoke earlier this afternoon, and you had mentioned that you had painted once before for a role. What role was that again?
In William Friedkin's To Live and Die in L.A.
Which is a great movie if you've never seen it. It's a fantastic film.
Thanks.
But
that was a very different experience. Because that character was also a counterfeiter and a killer, and which was more to the point. And also, it was a different, that was a preparation just to help me feel like an artist, where this movie is obviously really about painting.
So what did Julian want you to learn? What was the most important thing to him in terms of?
I think he wanted me, well, first of all, there was the practical aspect that he just, because I'm painting in real time, sometimes in this movie, he just wanted to make sure that I technically could do it. So practically, because we didn't have a lot of coverage, he had no intention to have a stunt painter or cut around me. I had to be painting, right? So that was important. And then the second part was, he really, it was the key to the character. I mean, Van Gogh said, I am my paintings. I mean, this was an intense devotion to his work. So to understand what he was writing about in his letters and to imagine what his state of mind was, I had to have some experience of painting. And Julian was an excellent teacher. He's a great painter. He's a great filmmaker. And he taught me some very basic things that changed how I see. And that was essential to understand about what I imagined Vincent would be thinking about.
Well, as we continue this conversation, I'm going to work in some of your questions from the audience. And Fernanda Rode, I hope I got that right, asked, obviously there was tons of material that you could have used to research the role. Besides what was given in the script and you're communicating with Julian, how did you decide what to zero in on? What was the most important, stuff that you wanted to bring from him into the story?
Painting, being in nature. The letters that he wrote to his brother are very inspiring, and they're very sincere, they're very clear, they're very heartfelt. So I found the things that he speaks about, specifically about painting, I really connected with, and some of the personal stuff was interesting as well. But I'd say painting. If you're doing a role, you want to find an activity that you learn something from and is active to take you away from yourself and also to put you in the frame of mind of someone else. And in learning to paint, I saw differently, I thought differently. So that really releases me from my habits and allows me to kind of apply that new kind of thinking to this character that I'm trying to inhabit. So it's really important to say that I didn't think so much about playing Vincent van Gogh. I thought about playing this guy that happens to be Vincent van Gogh in this particular way of telling the story. And how do I do that? Do the things that he did. And think about the things that he said and say the things that he said.
Well, Julian Schnabel, on his, in his own credits in his life, is a well-respected and renowned artist. What did he bring in terms of the environment on set to allow you to be able to inhabit Van Gogh in this way?
Well, certainly a visual style, and a very subjective camera, so you could imagine or feel like you were with Vincent. Clearly not a forensic biopic where we're trying to explain who he was. An imagination, an imagining of who we think maybe he could be. That was important. And also Julian is used to being the king of his domain, which is the studio. And I've been around him. And he has very clear ideas, but at the same time, like many great artists of any discipline, he has a plan, but also he's very receptive to what presents itself. And when you're out in nature and you're out in the places that Vincent van Gogh actually was, there's a lot to receive, because there's a lot there. A lot to inspire you and a lot to play on your imagination. So he had a very clear idea, but at the same time, we had times when we were very loose. And it's not so much a question of improvisation, it's just about where you dedicate your time to doing experiments and what your intention is behind those things. So sometimes we'd finish shooting early, and he'd say, let's go over to that area over there, let's go over to that field and paint. And sometimes we'd film some of that, and something would come out of that sequence when we're just out and he's eating the dirt early in the film. That's just being in nature and being with the camera and trying to imagine what his experience of being in nature was.
Speaking of scenes like that, can you talk about the moment where Van Gogh runs out of the cathedral? He's learned that Paul Gauguin is going to be leaving. And I had earlier spoken to the cinematographer, the great Benoit Deladome. Did I get it right? And just so the audience is aware, he had to be camera person that day because the person who was hired to be camera person didn't want to do the shot that had been discussed. So he's holding a camera that he was not prepared to hold, running after Willem in this scene. And you have to know as the actor where he is and to make that happen. And it's twilight and they're trying to get it before the sun goes down. So can you talk about that? Because that's hard. That's hard for anybody.
Well, we were like dancing partners, because as you see from the camera, it's a very subjective camera, and it's a light camera, and it's with us all the time. Of course, there's a lot of playing around sometimes with the image, with diopters and fuzzing the image to kind of take you off of your normal way of seeing and make you think, what am I seeing here? Which is, a good thing to ask yourself. In that case, it wasn't. The way you said it made it sounds quite dramatic, but it was a normal day filming as far as I was concerned. The Steadicam wasn't really, it wasn't a good shot, and actually all we knew is we wanted to know part of the scene was played inside that chapel, and we knew we wanted to go outside. And that's all we knew, and I, at a certain point, you make the decision to run. And that was it, and he followed me, and that's what it was. I mean, it was. Sometimes he would push me, sometimes I would push him. Sometimes he would pull me, sometimes I'd pull him. We didn't have conventional coverage. It was pretty loose, even though the ideas. I don't want to make it sound like we're just hanging out. It was very disciplined, but it was loose in the terms of actually setting shots.
I have a question from Patrick. He wants to know, do you prepare for a role differently if it is a historical figure versus if it was just a character that you've discovered in the script?
Every time I speak for myself, right? Every time is different, but for a historical role, I think usually you have more material if you want to read or to think about. And then at some point, I think you have to let that stuff go. But certainly if the information's there, you might as well use it. You know, and you don't have to dedicate yourself to it, but it can put you in a certain place. And I have played historical characters, and I've always found them really satisfying in the respect that you learn a lot. I played T.S. Eliot many, many years ago, and it introduced me to T.S. Eliot. I read all his work, and Pasolini. I played him. A wealth of really beautiful things that make me shift what I think. You know, I have an experience. Something happens to me. I'm transformed, and that's a good place to start. You know, not that I have to pay off who this person is or tell you who it is. No, it's really about I could be that guy. And let's face it, that's the first step of pretending, when you will yourself to be someone else, or take someone else's habits and point of view or physicality. That's the first step. So it is different. And at some point, you also have to forget it's a historical figure. I mean, because then you get into interpretation, and then I think the performing doesn't live. You've got to say, okay, I'm playing. If you are that guy, you're not playing the Christ. You're not playing the Pasolini. You're playing our Pasolini in our story. And I don't know whether that distinction is clear or even important to stress, but for me it is. You have to release yourself from a certain kind of responsibility so you can imagine.
There's a question from Roman sort of down these lines. One you should know is, how did your understanding of Van Gogh change after you got the opportunity to become him? After you played him, did you see him in a different way from when you had thought of him previously?
Yes. And I think before, Van Gogh is the kind of thing that I thought, oh, I know who Vincent van Gogh is, And I knew very little, really, when it came down to it. And then after doing this movie, certainly factually, I knew a lot more, and I had a personal relationship to him then. The biggest surprise was how sincere he was, how much joy he had, because historically he's kind of the poster child for the tortured artist, and a madman, and the emphasis of cutting off the ear and suiciding. Those are what we think about. And the poor guy didn't sell a painting. Well, all of those things may be true to some degree, but all of those are not absolutely clear. His ear, the motives weren't clear. How much of his ear he cut off wasn't clear. Suicide is questionable. He writes very beautiful things about the joy he was having in his work toward the end of his life. He made a painting a day. He was very prolific. And even though he didn't sell in his lifetime, he started getting a reputation toward the end of his life, and that's often ignored for the better narrative that's a little more melodramatic. So you learn these things, but I guess the joy, and also how he accepted certain aspects of life that most people try to push away. He really invited the darkness. He understood sometimes that was a part of life, and many things. His love for common people, for working people, and just certain concepts about his pursuit of what was important in his work, in nature, is many things.
I'm curious, Julian, this is his third film, I think? Fourth narrative?
No, Basquiat, what? Diving Bell and the Butterfly, the Ronaldo Arenas, Before Night Falls, right. Miral. So this is his fifth.
When he works with actors, does he like rehearsal? Like when
he doesn't rehearse. We don't rehearse with him.
Do you rehearse on your own? Did you and Oscar do any rehearsal before?
No.
So does he listen? No, I'm impressed.
I mean, the world was there. The world was there. We were trying to live it, and yeah.
You also said when we. You also said. When
I
we
mean,
spoke
I'm
earl-
good with rehearsal. I love rehearsal. Sometimes. It
You also-
depends what kind of film.
I was just when we spoke earlier, you had mentioned that he often just a couple takes.
It's true. Well, he was very decisive and kind of, he's got a little. There's a little part of Julian and Van Gogh. There's a little Van Gogh and Julian, but this kind of first thought, best thought kind of decisiveness, and painting fast and going beyond thinking and really committing to something. When I paint, particularly at the very beginning, sometimes I'd be very nervous because I wanted to do well, I wanted to connect with it, I wanted to, be making progress and be accomplished. And the painting was scary at the beginning. And sometimes I'd be painting and I'd go, ah! He'd say, what? And I'd say, I don't, that's terrible there. He'd say, there's no such thing as a bad mark. Just make another one. No, it's true. Because that's, the two things that are just really simple that I walked away with was this idea of making marks. And the marks play off of each other to create something. They're all individual, but then you compound that individual mark with these other marks, and then it creates a rhythm, it creates a swirl, it starts to speak to the whole rise and fall of everything. And that kind of made me think of acting, too, in terms of an action, an action, an action, and they compound it. One compounds the next, and then all of a sudden there's a rhythm. And then you kind of get buoyed up by that, and then there's a life to the character. There's a thrust to the action. There was that, and also this concept of painting the light, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to paint you and try hard to find something that really was a good photographic likeness. I kind of scrub you clean, and I go beyond the surface, and I paint the light. I see white here. I see almost a blue here, Be brave. Go with those colors, and you start to do that. You sort of see that in the shoe sequence. The colors are all wrong in a funny way. And it looks terrible for a long time, right? But then, finally, for me anyway, it goes chunk. And it captures something that's maybe not a good likeness for those shoes, but it captures the spirit of it. And that's something that Van Gogh talks about over and over again. And I think it applies sort of to acting, too. A reality that's better than reality. He talked about, what's his... I'm trying to think of the painter that he loved so much. Monet? No. I mean, he liked Monet. Monet's not bad, he said. Anyway, he talked about the sewer. Who did the original sewer? Anybody know? I'm blanking on that. Yes. Thank you. He was a great fan of Millet. And this sewer he did many times, and he talked about there's more soul in Millet's sewer than any sower in the field.
Yeah. So when you're having these experiences and you're working with someone like Schnabel, one of the people in the audience brought up an excellent question in the sense, was there anything unexpected that happened besides the scenes we've already talked about that you just were sort of almost euphoric in a way, that you just had a great sort of moment that you just, when you think about shooting the film, just sort of pop back in your head?
Every day. No, this was a joyous film to make. I can honestly say I had a wonderful time because to be in nature, to be connecting it through this character was a joyful thing. And this idea of seeing past the surface of things. And you see it in his paintings. He the swirl of everything is there. It's not, I love it when he says, I don't invent the picture. I find it in nature, and I just have to free it. All of these things, for me, I mean, we're a bunch of actors. There are parallels, if you ask me. When you perform, you're not just illustrating things. You're not just representing things. You're living something that's beyond that, and there's some sort of parallel there.
This is one of my favorite questions that were submitted. It's from Noah's mom. That's Noah's mom. We were wondering who Noah's mom was. The question is, and there's a wonderful compliment at the beginning. You're so good, a genius at your craft. How long was filming? And second, how long do you prepare yourself traditionally before a role?
Depends. It really does. Because, sometimes, I feel like with each project, there's a different kind of preparation. Sometimes you feel ready to perform, ready to, I think about earning the right or the authority to pretend or to inhabit a character. You have to create some sort of experience that makes you feel like, yes, I am this person, or I can act on this person's behalf. I am this person, And sometimes you need very little. I think about, I always go back to a role I did in a David Lynch film called Wild at Heart. Good. That character, and this doesn't make it any less, but as soon as I put in some artificial teeth and I got the wardrobe on, I knew who that character was. It's like an instinctive thing. And then other characters, you really have to create an experience and a relationship with. You got to make something. You got to experience something that allows you the confidence and the imagination to be someone else.
I'm just curious, is there any role that you've had that may have been acclaimed by critics, audiences loved it, but at the time you weren't sure whether you'd actually sort of inhabited the role?
Probably. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, that's fair. That's totally fair. I do have a similar question, though, from Stuart. Stuart wants to know, was there a moment in your career when you knew you arrived? He also loved you as Jesus.
Oh, okay, thank you. There's no arriving.
So even after Platoon, after that first Academy
No
Award?
arriving. There's relative appreciation, there's relative success, but, no. I mean, for me, I don't think there's, sometimes it's popular to use this word, oh, you really nailed it. I don't respond to that. I really don't. Because it's so subjective, and you can always go further, it's always about going towards something, and the purity of that going towards something, and the purity of that engagement. That's what protects you, and that's what keeps you going on, and that's what makes you not even think about whether something's a success or a failure. That's the kind of peace and the kind of engagement that will not get you inflated if you have a success, and not devastate you if you have a failure. Keep on going. Avanti, avanti, avanti.
I'm assuming you felt satisfaction with the performance, I'd hope.
Yes, yeah, I do sometimes. But what good does that do you? It's just like in the theater, you perform. If you have a good performance, that's great. But there's tomorrow night. Finnegan, do it again.
Well, what's so interesting is, I talk to actors all the time for what I do for a living, and I feel like often you talk to many of them, and it's not that they don't like acting, but they sort of wear it on their shoulders like it's this sort of burden sometimes to play a role.
I love performing. I love it. I mean, it's a gift to be able to do it.
Please clap for that.
Thanks, Mom.
But I guess my question is
Noah's mom?
Noah's
Yeah,
mom.
all right.
The question for you is: you love the shooting, you love the being on the set more than anything else, more than seeing the final result and all of that.
I like that, but that's for the people. The shooting's for me. And somewhere broadly, I think about having an experience and having it in an honest, open way, and then having that recorded, and then it becomes something else, because as an actor, even though you could be a collaborator and very involved on some level, it goes into other hands, an editor, many things change. So you got to let it go. My job is always, no matter what the level of collaboration or involvement, is to create material that is true and not full of, that lives and is honest and true somehow, is connected, has some sort of commitment to it. That's what I like trying to do.
I think the other really interesting thing about your career is you were one of, there's always this sort of cliche that, one for them, one for me. And few artists actually make it work, but somehow you do, like, whether you intend to or not.
I never think that way. One for them, one for me, because I don't know which one is for them and which one's for me. No, I mean, it kind of happens naturally, to tell you the truth. And I'm used to that, for many years I worked in the theater and worked in movies as well. The movie world didn't know about the theater, and the theater didn't know about the movies. It was kind of like having a mistress or something, Yeah, I don't know about this one for them, one for me.
Well, I guess just in the sense that you end up often taking challenging roles with maybe filmmakers who haven't had, as much experience or exposure as others, and you'll do a big studio movie, whether it's, you just Aquaman, which is in theaters, I think, 2 weeks from Friday.
Yeah, soon.
And, or...
I think December 21st. Not I think, I know.
But then you've taken roles like Florida Project and Antichrist, films that are challenging and clearly...
But so is Aquaman challenging. They're just different challenges.
What's the most challenging thing about doing something like Aquaman or a Spider-Man or a big studio movie in that respect?
Well, let's speak about something specific like Aquaman. You've got to stay rooted. It's got a lot of special effects. It's a big production. You got to stay connected. It's the same thing that you're trying to do with Florida Project.
Makes sense. My last question for you is a question from the audience is, after making this film, what is your favorite Van Gogh painting? I could not have stumped you with that.
You stumped me.
I don't believe it.
It's like...
Pick 2.
The shoes are important because I practiced them so much. And that was kind of a do or die situation. I thought, if I fail at this movie is not going to work. I like many of the landscapes. Probably I like the landscapes even more than the portraits, to tell you the truth. But that's not a hard thing, I can change.
We all can. Thank you so much, Willem. Sure. Please thank Willem Dafoe. Please spread the word about At Eternity's Gate.